Welcome to everyone who's joining us today for another conversation, and as well, likewise, those who are listening to potentially the recording. This is an extension of the conference around agility, resilience, and anti-fragility, and we have an absolutely wonderful guest again with us today who we'll dive into. Very, very briefly about myself, I'm a transformation and change, if you will, consultant and coach, partner with organizations to really help them calibrate their business models and operating models, and have the impact in the world that they would like to see for a very much a positive sense, if you will. As I've said before, if you was, and those that know me, I really embrace what I call the sacred triad and helping clients really have that impact, in particular dealing with reality, very, very much so. Their human nature, very key, and their own identity are extremely crucial to achieving that aliveness through awareness for that impact. So without much more to say about myself, I want to briefly kind of set the stage as I always do. We have an incredible guest, and I have to share with you, I was hooked on reaching out to Kathryn as soon as I read Stories as Cathartic Cleansing. Extremely powerful statement. She's written numerous novels. She has a tremendous career spanning more than 45 years, if you will, in teaching, all the way from preschool, elementary, middle school, high school. So the span is a very, very incredible point of view that she brings forward. Additionally, a practicing, if you will, psychologist, very, very key. Likewise, another vantage point. And I absolutely love the way that she describes her beloved career in terms of raising her 4 children. So with not much more to say, an absolutely honor to have Kathryn with us. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you. I enjoy being here, and I think your program is a very good way to go in this changing world.
Thank you so much. So I know I didn't do justice, but the world wants to. Who is Kathryn? Tell us who you are, my friend.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of getting it started. I've had a career in working with human beings and children, and well, they're human beings all across a lifespan. And it has been a joy. I have learned so much from them. I just feel a sense of grace and power, a neat combination of grace and power when I'm with people, because I'm constantly open to learning from them. I grew up on the prairies of Minnesota and went to college in Michigan and pursued a degree in psychology from Michigan State, and I have a PhD in psychology. I met my husband there, and we had 4 children. I lost my husband in 2006, so I was widowed for a period of time. And that really pushed me into facing myself and realizing that I had some growing to do because of the life changes that were part of my life at that time. My youngest had turned 18, and he was off to college. And I was an empty nester on many levels. I did my very best. I went into therapy, and I will recommend whether you're a PhD, a psychologist, a doctor, whatever, you need to find helpful people to get you through some of the crisis situations. And I was in therapy twice a week for 9 months and came out of that a much stronger person. So crises, and I consider that it was a crisis, creates in you strength if you use it and understand new dimensions in your life and how to cope and be flexible and grow through them. The biggest joy I've had in my life is raising my children. They have been delightful. They're very comical, and they're resilient as well. They've had to learn right along with me of how to be resilient in the face of crisis. And currently I'm writing my 6th book. And this one is a continuation of Abigail's Exchange. It is the 2nd book in a series of 3. And it is based on the Old Testament character of Abigail and her husband Nabal and the changes she made to get through some difficult times in her life. And I'm enjoying my writing career as well as being a grandma. I have 7 grandchildren, and they're all different. And I find a spark of life and joy in them each time I see them.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kathryn. And I would definitively want to say likewise. it's interesting for our children. We have one, and essentially at this, I like to say she's teaching me the lessons I failed to learn in my own journey historically. Absolutely. As you know, so it's a tremendous hearing that background.
Mm-hmm.
My good friend, you definitely identify the 7 resilient qualities. And they go from nature to openness to dealing with the dark, if you will, creativity and connecting and reflection and purpose. I would love for you to sort of kind of set the stage a little bit for our audience relative to the qualities.
Yeah, those 7 qualities came after 35 years as a psychologist. And there were successful clients and those that were not successful. The ones that I found were successful were able to sustain the therapeutic goals over time. And I looked at what they did, who they were, the changes they made, and brought them to the fore and looked at them. And there were ultimately 7 qualities. Now, the overarching quality that I don't actually delineate in the 7, but it's a deep faith. I come from the Christian faith, but any faith that has really entered the person's heart is such a good platform for growing and for sustaining therapy. The ones who didn't have a faith base struggled some because they would get over a current problem, but another problem would surface and they'd have to come back into therapy. Whereas being able to sustain health over time, it really was facilitated by a good faith base. The 7 qualities, I took the case studies in the book. Made case studies of the ones that were successful in these different areas. And the first one is nature. Mm-hmm. Being able to look at nature, going out in the middle of nature and feel refreshed and renewed was a key factor in resilience. And when we had clinical meetings, they would say, the other therapists would say, I think you get as much out of therapy as what you would in nature. And it's a whole lot less expensive. But in the fact of really renewing your spirits, looking at God's nature had a tremendous effect in the resilient behavior of my clients. Another one was the mindset of adventure. And we've talked about this already, staying open. Okay, what's around the corner? What is out there? Our brain has a wave we call the beta wave. And this is when the brain is turned on, discovering new things. And this is when your body is alive and energized. And when you're open to life, you can find new ways of shaping yourself and making the changes that you need to. So that's another quality that's really very important. Another one is what I call dark walking. And this is kind of a different concept. But as a psychologist, we know that you need to look at your subconscious, at your dark side, in order to learn from it and grow from it so that you can face the challenges that are there. So your proclivity, your tendency to shift in certain ways that might not be beneficial to you. So knowing that is key. It's like equipping yourself for a battle. And you just know that you have a tendency to do this. And so you create strategies that will keep you from falling into those minefields. Another one is being creative in the face of scarcity. My clients would come in and want things. They would want, maybe there was some difficulty financially. They didn't have the resources they wanted. Maybe they didn't have the relationships they wanted. Maybe they didn't have the children that they expected to get and they were disappointed. We're always in a state of want. Okay, yeah. So people who are resilient are able to be creative in solving those problems. So let's say you have a child who's not doing well in school and you would want a child that is successful. So you learn how to be creative with this. Okay, would tutors help? Is he just missing this because maybe he has a learning disability? There's different ways you can solve the problem, and staying open to that is really important to make the changes. So being creative in the face of scarcity and in the state of want is one of them. Another one is connecting with helpful people, and that's the first thing. And any research that's been done on resilience, it always talks about the importance of connecting with people who are helpful people. Now, one of the things we know as a psychologist, that I knew as a psychologist, is that we tend to gravitate toward the same level of people at our level of self-esteem. And if we're struggling and not doing well in our life, we tend to attract that same level of self-esteem. So sometimes you have to actually work on yourself to achieve more and to find out more who you are so that you have higher self-esteem, and you tend to then gravitate toward higher quality people. And it's not a quick overnight process, but it's a learned process. It is very important to connect, and I always recommend therapy. And you find a therapist, and if it's not working for you, if you don't feel like there's growth, you find somebody else. Connect with someone who is truly helpful for you. That is really very key. That's the starting place for growing to a higher level of self-esteem. Another one is being reflective. And that is, take someone who is able to look backward in order to look forward. And that seems like it's contradictory or an oxymoron, but it's not. So you look at things that have happened in the past in your life, you learn from them so that you can make better choices in the future. So being reflective and looking back and analyzing is a very key factor in resilience. And then the last one is the mission. People who have a mission is very important. Whether it be your connectedness with God, with your fellow man, with your family, have a mission to help them and bless them to move forward. So those are the 7 qualities that I found in people who were successful.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that context for us. There's a few things I want to drill into, because I think they're very, very powerful as you've expressed them. In particular, as I've looked at your writing, you talk about a deep spirituality, and that is fundamental, exactly as you've described it. The question that I would love for you to kind of offer some perspective on is, as we focus on our identity being so core, if you will, if we don't have a sense of something beyond ourselves, then it's very difficult to overcome our ego. So if I don't have a sense of purpose or a spirituality, then I'm almost always self-centered in some capacity. Does that broader picture really help us overcome our ego, Kathryn, in the experiences that you've had?
I guess the way I can say it best is, it's the relief of the big picture.
Beautiful.
It's realizing that you're just one among many, and there is a God out there who has a plan for your life. You realize that, I can't do this by myself, and you realize that man is not the center of the universe. He's an important part of the universe, but there's a God that is directing this process here, and that's a relief, knowing that you can't do everything, that you can't change all the ills of the world, that you can't know exactly what your life is going to be in 5 years. So it's allowing someone else to take charge in those arenas.
Thank you for that, because I think it's very powerful as I use the word beyond, if you will, or overcoming our ego. You express it as a relief, a degree, and it's an empowering liberation, exactly as you're expressing it, versus anything else. So thank you for that. I think that's very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. The other thing I love your thoughts on, and you said it so eloquently, if you will, respectfully. We are always in a state of wanting, as you expressed. The thing that I found very powerful as you expressed yourself, it's to achieve that wanting, if you will, it is really to tap into our creativity, our own creativity, our creativity together, to help us move toward that wanting, I'll say, versus actually become self-centered and say, well, I deserve it, or I want you to give it to me, but truly tap into that creativity aspect.
Yes, exactly. And it's being able to problem solve and look at something differently. So there's been some childhood research that has been done, and children who are able to see a cup, but also that can be a cap for your head, that it can be something play, you can play telephone with that. There's many different uses for common objects, and that can be also expanded to mean, different ways of problem solving human behavior as well. So there are just so many angles that we can look at to make it work.
Very well said. Very well said. The other thing that you mentioned, looking backwards and to look forward, if you will, it requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of courage to confront ourselves. As you expressed respectfully in your personal journey, when your husband passed, it takes a lot of courage to confront ourselves and say, hey, I got to work on me before anything, if you will.
Let me tell you something personal. My father was an attorney, and then my late husband was an attorney. So they handled all the taxes for me forever.
Mm.
So here I am, a middle-aged woman, and I don't know how to handle taxes. So it means that I have to really step up and find out. You have to learn. That learning curve was high, but you also have to I found a helpful person, and I used all of those same strategies in my life that people need to when they're creative. So yeah, it's very important to establish that openness in learning.
Yeah, and that openness, as I listen to you and again have read some of your work and what have you, definitely that openness comes with that balance of courage. Because if you don't have the courage to be open, you're precluding yourself, you're precluding others from benefiting of that connection that you could have with others as such.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you are becoming a full human being. You're adding new dimensions to your life, and it's troubling. You feel insecure all the time, but at the same time, that's what reaches you towards security. I can find in myself that human empowerment that I need to get through this time in my life.
And I think that's a beautiful reminder, quite honestly, to respectfully, we as a society across the world, empowerment is a big concept, being identified as we want to be identified. There's a lot of empowerment that comes from us embracing some of the tenets you've shared with us today. A tremendous empowerment that comes just by embracing these kinds of tenets.
Right. Yeah.
So there's one area I would love for you to comment on a little bit more significantly, deeply, as in our conversation, dealing with the dark and the dark walking, as you referenced. It's a challenge for many, of course, human beings to deal with their dark side. I'll say, sort of guidance, wisdom to begin that I'll say dialogue, that engagement of our dark side that you can share with our audience.
Well, some of the qualities, and it is limitless what that dark side can do, but just some of the fears that you have, the failures you've had in the past, the concerns you have about the future, your relationships that have not been successful. So looking at all of those and the outcome of really looking at where you failed and where you need work, it increases your human understanding of others. And you gain a huge amount of empathy because you realize that everybody has a dark side, that it's not a mark against you. Right. It is actually the humanness side of you that has that dark side. And you look at even the development of children in a different way, because in adolescence, their goal here is to, of course, find out their identity, but also to wrestle with that dark side and learn how to manage it so they can be effective adults. So it is an ongoing developmental process as well.
Very well said. I often use the phrase, Kathryn, if we don't tame our very nature, aka our dark side, if you will, then the nature will tame us. Then we get the impact, if you will, of not working with our dark side, if you will, at that point. So
right. It will do you in. It simply will do you in.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of everyone has to learn how to manage it. And when we look at serial killers, many times they have compartmentalized that dark side. They just disown it.
Yeah.
And then the acting out becomes solely on the subconscious level. And that's a very dangerous process, obviously. So you want to be able to accept it, know it, understand it, and then manage it.
Yeah. Yeah, very powerful. The underlying tone and again, please correct me if I'm misusing a word relative to your work. The underlying tone that I keep hearing, and as I reflect on your work, very much the humanness, the humanity of it, that manifests through a degree of awareness of ourselves, of others, and really respecting the grand wholeness of everything.
Right. Yeah. Clearly, is that human empowerment, and you talk about that a lot. And it comes from a resolve to really understand who you are in yourself, that you really can't control a whole lot that happens to you.
Yeah.
You have to control your reaction to it and what you can do about it there. So it's a lot of it is internal process. I often say to my clients, here we are, we've gone to the moon, we've traveled the universe, but some of the scariest traveling is when you go inside and you recognize that there's a lot of hate and jealousy in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of impulses that are pretty lecherous, and you have to just call them for what they are, and then they don't control you anymore. The more you can get out of your subconscious and make it conscious, the more you can control it and manage it.
Beautifully expressed. Beautifully expressed. My good friend, we often, including ourselves, we're human at the end of the day, but we often encounter folks, particularly that are not willing to confront themselves, not willing to begin to engage the dark side, even respectfully, if we observe it and the impact of it around them. Any guidance, if you will, kind of sort of what we can do to help respectfully provoke them in a way that begins that wake up process?
Well, a lot of times life happens and it evokes this. I mean, they recognize that something's wrong. But I am so convinced that love is what does it, that you listen and you listen and you listen and you listen. And finally, it becomes okay for them to share that they have a real secret or a dark side inside of themselves. So it becomes important to listen to them and just hear them out and be respectful and love them.
It's very powerful, and I don't know, respectfully, Kathryn, if you're, I'm sure you've crossed it in your journey, if you will. Robert Sternberg's theory of love, where he talks about three elements, if you will. He says intimacy, passion, and commitment. And I use this in my, if you will, my own practice, where I say intimacy is awareness of the other party, very much exactly how we express love. I need to be aware of you in order to express love. And not only is that awareness key, but additionally, as he calls it, passion, I need to apply energy to understanding, to looking at the world through your eyes, the empathy aspect, and then commitment to be able to say, hey, this is a partnership where I will help you grow, you will help me grow. And it really manifests as again, by his definition of love. I think it's extremely powerful that you referenced the word. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And it's amazing how many worlds you can shake up, how many things that can happen in a positive way when you do that.
Very well said. And I've actually called Robert Sternberg's work, if you will, some of my secret sauce to working with clients and what have you, because it does make a huge difference, even though in a corporate setting, the word love isn't exactly the word that we might attribute to these things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful.
But it's about listening and being present with that person and acknowledge him and letting them know that you're part of that pact to help them grow.
Exactly. So I know I want to dive into a little bit of your writing, if you will. Where are we going next? And what you've already mentioned, you've got a next book coming out and what have you, but please give us more insight.
I am really enjoying writing my heart out. It's been a real treat to be able to do that, to be old enough to and have time to do it. The first book I wrote was about my father, who was a pilot in the Second World War, and it took me 20 years to write that, and I was very skittish and uncertain, but it was well received, mostly by family and friends. And then I went on, I said, I have all this information that I've stored away about my practice, and I was getting ready to retire. And I said, I think I need to write something that will share with people what I learned from those years as a psychologist, because people trust you, and that's in itself is a gift. And I learned so much from them when they opened up and shared their stories with me. So I wanted to get that out, and that's Resilience, a workbook. And then I started to get into, I was in a Bible study with a group of women and read the Abigail Nabal story and found it so compelling. It was quite a dramatic story out of the Old Testament. And it was about this woman who actually stood up and made a difference for King David, who he was not the king at that time, but he was still wandering the fields. And Nabal was a troubled husband, and she tried to make amends for him. And then at the end, she became one of David's concubine. And it's just an interesting story in the Old Testament. So I took that and I set it in the 1800s, 1880s actually, to be exact, in Baltimore, Maryland, where the railroad was really starting to blossom. And it was a fascinating story about what it was like being a widow during that time. And basically, it paralleled my experience becoming a widow. And it was clear that fortune or misfortune was one man away. So if they would lose their husband, they would be wealthy and okay financially. But if their husband died, society had no way of supporting them to keep them going. So it was a study in widowhood during that time, as well as a woman standing up for herself and having her own business. So that was the first book in a series of 3 it will be. So I'm working on the second one right now. But that one is being pitched for a movie right now. So we'll see what happens to it. It's historical fiction. So we'll see where that happens. That can take years. So I'm learning to be patient. And then I wrote a book. I went to Africa for Compassion International and became aware of some of the challenges in Africa. And I wrote a book based on the history of the Congo, going from 1947 to 1987, when it evolved from the Belgian Congo all the way up to Zaire and Mobutu. And he started out as a good ruler, but over time he became a totalitarian individual and was very ruthless with his people. And it's a story about a young girl who is in the cobalt mines in the Congo, and how she tries to survive. She is given a message, a script by her mother to get education. So she goes about trying to find a way where she can become educated. And she is successful, but the health care that she received, and also based on experiences that she had, she died young. She died in her 40s. But it's a good story. And I had a friend from the State Department read it, and I said, is this pretty close? Because she actually knew Mobutu during her tenure at the State Department. And she said, yes, it really does explain a lot of the dynamics that are in Africa. So I felt relieved by that. And then the last one I've written here is called Prison Shadows. And the base is in Michigan. And it looks at a young man, well, in his 30s, who is a drug trafficker, small town drug trafficker, who is catapulted into the prison system in Upper Peninsula in Michigan, a very much a outpost and a barbarous prison, a difficult situation. And then also the main theme is where his family dysfunction becomes a negative burden for him, and that's how the story ends. So, and the one I'm working on now is is a sequel to Abigail's Exchange.
Excellent. One of the Kathryn, when we had, I'd reached out and you and I were exchanging, and I had announced, if you will, that you were joining us. The question that I always got is, we want to hear how Kathryn suggests we use stories for cathartic cleansing. I mean, how would
it's very important that I align my readers with my characters so that they identify with them. They understand the difficulties and challenges they're facing. And through this process, when the storyline and the arc of the story it moves forward, the reader is right along with them.
Mhm.
And at the end of the story, there's a sadness, a deep sadness that cleanses our soul. Just by listening to another person, you can actually clean yourself out. It's a neat process, but it's been a literary technique since the Greeks, and it's been very successful.
Yeah, it's and in my own, if you will, coaching consulting practice, especially executives that are being bombarded as all roles are bombarded, but especially executives, when they're being bombarded with so many decisions that impact so many people around them. I always use stories to help them begin to kind of get them outside of themselves to see the landscape in a very different vernacular.
Yes.
I would love your thoughts on kind of that's just the approaches that you've
Well,
used.
what I would do with my clients who are dealing with some disorders, I read them the stories from the third ear. So they would come into the therapeutic session, and I would read them a story, and then we would talk about it, and they would apply it, to their particular situation. But that's very effective because they're able to be somewhat detached and not so completely invested, but yet invested. And it really is very, very helpful for that change, helping them change.
From Kathryn, from your journey, have you seen? Are you? I'll say historically, have we seen enough use of stories in helping each other grow, or because I'm definitely seeing an increase now, especially more than ever. But I would love your thoughts, kind of from what you've observed.
Yes, I think the stories are just, and there are so many books published daily.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, great, because all of that is therapeutic. Most of it is therapeutic.
Yeah.
And there are some that are gimmicky and not helping with reality.
Yeah.
And I think we just have to accept that as part of what it is. But I encourage the stories that really meet human need and really help us grow. That's where I'm at, is finding that portion that really does make a difference in our life.
Most definitely. The nuggets of gold are out there, exactly to your point, to be embraced and discovered and what have you. So tremendous. So my good friend, I know we're kind of approaching time. I would love sort of your closing thoughts, anything you'd like to leave our audience with all around, Kathryn.
The importance of, really working on yourself. And if you feel like you're in a very lonely spot, find a helpful person, probably a therapist, because they're unbiased. They have no hidden agendas, to help you through the crisis, because that connection with another human being is so critical. And so many of the states now have telehealth, and it seems to be working very well throughout the country. I encourage people to do that. You're not alone. There are so many people that are struggling with the very same thing you are struggling. And also, then you in turn can be a blessing. You can learn how to listen and love to another person. And that is basically, fundamentally, what changes humanity.
Beautiful. I can't say any better, but starting with yourself and then reaching out to others and then perpetuating, exactly as you mentioned, across the landscape. So Kathryn, a pleasure having you. And thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
You're welcome, Si.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for all who joined us. And likewise, we'll listen to the recording and we look forward to future conversations. Thank you all around.
All right. Yeah.
Take care now. Bye-bye.